Welcome back, Pound for Pound Sports Show. Coming back into our second segment here. We wanted to talk UFC pay scales. There's a lot of stuff going on. You know, everybody likes to compare UFC and boxing for the fighting aspect, but now it's time to kind of take a look at the pay scales. And I find this really interesting because people always talk about how little, and you hear this a lot from the fighters. The Rampage Jackson's out there,
right?
Which is funny. Look at that guy's truck. He doesn't look like he's exactly hurting.
Yeah, exactly.
18, right?
He's got enough money to support 10 kids. I mean, I've only got one, and I'm having trouble.
He has almost that.
It's real interesting to hear people talk about that. I mean, everybody's going to talk about how poverty-stricken they are, but what a lot of people don't really talk about is what it really takes to kind of run a business, what it takes to promote a fight. I mean, everybody looks at the UFC. You know, they're the top dog. They're at the top of the mountain. People don't look at what it takes to start a promotion from the bottom, and you don't see a lot of the growing pains. I mean, Shanna from Invicta was talking about growing pains. I mean, that's
great.
It's not an easy thing to, and we're talking about somebody who's been involved with all those same people we're talking about, so she would know better than anybody else. What I want to talk about, a couple facts and figures. Producer, I'm sorry, I got to read something real quick. I can't look directly in the camera. Just bear with me. The guaranteed money is what they actually make. I'm going to refer to the Pacquiao-Bradley fight and the Sonnen-Silva fight because that was the biggest pay-per-view of the year by far. The Pacquiao-Bradley fight, it was a $9 million gate and $900K in pay-per-views, and they guaranteed. The funny thing is they guaranteed Pacquiao $26 million, Bradley $5 million. That's how much guaranteed they got. Okay, so by comparison, you have Silva-Sonnen 2. They had a $7 million gate and they had over $1 million pay-per-view buys. And if you look on paper, it says that Sonnen was guaranteed $50K and Anderson Silva $200K. Now, that's where people are coming from, but it doesn't stop there. It doesn't cover the back end. The UFC doesn't disclose the exact amount, but there's no gag order in place either, so it's not like you're not allowed to talk about it. Dana's kind of alluded to the fact that the fighters don't want you to know how much they make.
Of course
point
not.
blank.
I was happy you brought that up.
And a lot of it's incentive-based. A lot of it they depends on how much. I mean, you look at a guy like Sonnen, of course he's going to jump into that title shot because he's going to get back end. He's one of those back end fighters. So the more he runs his mouth, if people watch him for whatever, it doesn't matter. You know, he served his purpose and he's going to get his on the back end. Another thing people aren't talking about is the sponsorship dollar split with the fighters, especially the undercard fighters in the UFC. Nobody talks about that. Appearances, coaching jobs, gifts, spiffs. I mean, the fighters, the fighters are doing actually pretty well. And, it's not just a pay-per-view king and Pacquiao and, how can I get a fight with Pacquiao or the last remaining pay-per-view draws.
Right.
This is a year-round gig for a lot of the UFC fighters. They get taken care of pretty well. So I want to ask you guys, is the incentive-based system more beneficial for the fighters like the UFC has, or do you think boxing has a better scale for the fighters?
Well, let's look at this a couple ways. First of all, you hear about these big paydays in boxing, but honestly, that's you're just hearing about the top guys. There's a ton of boxers in there that are making nothing.
What's the guy in Friday Night Fights making?
Exactly. That's my first thing. Or the guy that's not even on TV. Fighting,
right.
That's
at the Pachanga.
Exactly.
How much is he making?
That's my first point. Second point. How long has boxing been around? How long have they had to build the sport up?
Excellent point.
Since the 1800s, for crying out loud.
They're fighting 25 rounds back in the day.
Exactly. MMA is in its infancy still. So, you can't. It's really, really tough to compare the two. It really is. These guys who are complaining about money, nobody's going to go get punched in the face for nothing.
Right.
These guys are making plenty of money, and if you're really struggling that much, you can bag groceries, you can flip burgers.
Go back to the bag of groceries thing.
Nobody's gonna punch you in the face when you do that, most likely.
More than likely, unless you stack the milk on the bread or something like that.
They're making enough money to be willing to let somebody punch them in the face. And let me tell you, you see these shows, you see these guys training, you see how hard these guys are training. They're not doing that because they're making no money or because there's no potential to make money. They're making money, I'm just tired of I get tired of hearing the complaint, and nobody makes you do it, nobody makes you do it. They're getting paid lots of money, and they're not. I agree with you. I don't think that they're really disclosing everything they make on the back end. I think there's a lot more back end money than people realize.
Well,
absolutely.
I mean, fans don't be fooled. The reason why there's stickers on their shorts and when they got a big sticker on their butt when you're staring at it when they're on top position, it's because they're getting paid for that time that you're staring at them on top. So don't think they're not making money. And Dana did make a good point, actually. I heard him on the radio talking about this, is that he said that fighters don't want you to know how much they make. And the guy asked him, said, well, NFL does it, MLB does it, basketball does it. They disclose all of the money that they make. And he brought a good point. He said, yeah, and look what happened. Look at Tyson. He's disclosed how much money he made, and there you go. You got Don King grabbing at him. As soon as you let all these people know how much money you actually have, everybody's going to come out of the woodworks, and that's the way it's always been. The world wants money, and they're going to go where it's at. You never see GSP anywhere. You never see him out. He doesn't party. He goes home. Nothing.
Yeah, no, that's a great point. And what good does it do to pay a fighter $30 million if the promoter is going to take most of it? I mean, it doesn't matter. It serves no purpose. And secondly, I mean, you look at the guys in boxing. I mean, anybody of any notoriety with any money in boxing, their entourage, they have 3-piece suits. There's 10, 15 of them in the ring. I mean, you know what I mean?
Those guys are there for nothing.
There's a fair,
They're paying a lot of that money is going to those guys anyway.
Those guys aren't even carrying buckets. I mean, they serve no purpose. I mean, I think there's a fair amount of truth in that.
Can I touch on that really quick? I was listening to Sirius last night on my way on the freeway. I was listening to Sirius, and these guys are they're rappers. They got record deals, and they're talking about how they're in the ring. You got 50 Cent they're hanging out with, and he's trying to get into boxing, and all these rappers they're in the ring. You watch boxing, when the fight's over, you got all these guys coming into their ring. I don't know any rappers or any kind of country stars that are being boxers or deserve to be in the ring with a guy when he just won a fight. No sense.
I was gonna say, can you imagine the royalties of having like 50 Cent or an actual rapper sing on the way into the ring?
You've seen that a few times.
What's that like?
I've seen that a few times.
That's got to cost a.
They brought back the Survivor guy from Eye of the Tiger.
I mean, Jesus, man, what are we doing out here? You touched up on a good point earlier. Who's coming to MMA? Well, you look at wrestlers in the London Games. I mean, judo guys, karate guys. There's finally a place for them to fight now. If you're going to talk about strictly boxing, there's nowhere for these guys to go. Division I All-Americans. How many of them are fighting in mixed martial arts today? I mean, if there's only $50,000 or $60,000 to be made, I don't think top tier athletes like that would be even looking mixed martial arts. Do you?
No,
I mean,
absolutely not.
That's crazy. So
absolutely
I mean, that's who's coming. This is my favorite part, and I know you like a lot of the back end stuff too. I always love back end facts and figures, but this is what it takes to run a business. If you think about it, the UFC is not a public company. They're not required to disclose anything to the public. So that's first off. But then look at how much it cost the UFC to cancel UFC 151. They said it was upwards of $20 million.
Great point.
I mean, when you think about it. Okay, we live in San Diego. It's one of the top. It's in the top 10 biggest cities in the country. Think about what it would take to buy full page ads, commercials everywhere in every major market. How much does that cost?
And a wealthy area. This place it costs.
Think
money
about
for
that. They also talk about the UFC's version of 24/7. They say it costs over $1 million to produce an hour-long episode. They also have to split money with the cable provider when you have a pay-per-view. There's site fees, local, federal taxes. Think about the tons of people it takes to set up and just be involved with that, all making a salary, all with benefits, all paying local and state taxes. The cost of medical for every fighter. This is one of my favorites. They did a landmark type of thing. I want to say it was late 2010, early 11, where they actually cover every fighter, all their medical needs. No other sport does that quite like the UFC. How much do you think that costs to do?
After the fight.
And don't you think that the fact that the UFC is taking all of that risk,
all of the risk,
all of that risk, and you see it when that event got canceled, none of those bills went away. None of those people said, "Oh, don't pay us since you didn't have it." They're not paying them because the show's going on. Whether the show goes on or not, they have to pay this. Don't you think that maybe they deserve the larger portion of the profits from that?
Right.
And I'm not saying, you got to pay your fighters. Honestly, if they're not paying their fighters enough, the fighters are going to stop fighting.
Exactly.
Exactly. So I think if they're taking all that risk, which was proved with UFC 151, what type of risk that is, they deserve the spoils, or most of them. Not all of them. They got it. Of course, you got to pay the fighters, but
I agree.
And let's think also this. The other thing is streaming Facebook. They charge Facebook to actually stream on there to show their fights, and you're losing that money for those two fights they've been pushing forever.
Huge point right there.
Is it FX too?
Yes.
I think.
Big time point. When you have a page on Facebook, and we know that as well as anybody, you can have 10,000 likes on your Facebook. You post something. That doesn't mean all 10,000 people are going to see. They charge money for. They might give you, of the, let's say 1,000 likes, maybe you post something, maybe 10, 25 people see it. It costs money for the rest of them to see it.
And actually, every time somebody hits like on Facebook, they make $1.50 back.
Right.
Facebook, I don't know how it works this way. I saw the numbers disclosed,
but I know.
Yeah, when you share a link or you hit like on Facebook, it doesn't matter if it's my page or UFC. The Facebook makes $1.50 per one. So they're getting their money back, and when you cancel that, I mean, there's all that money down the toilet.
Now, think about what it takes to promote all that stuff. And, I mean, if you look at I talk about sanctioning bodies, too, because obviously none of the casual fans are looking at this. But look at the WBC. I said it last week. Go look, type in WBC on Wikipedia. You could see a timeline of events, all with Don King's name in it.
I know.
And you can see what dirty promoters do. You could see where all that extra money goes. So when you see a guy like Sonnen making a guaranteed $50K, trust me, he's making a lot more than $50K. And if he weren't, who would be going to the UFC? It's not like Dana and the Fertittas are just, oh man, we made another $60 million this pay-per-view. I mean, it just doesn't work like that. So I think it's fair to actually point out that the UFC also made, I think Dana said something like 40 multimillionaires since they've gone mainstream around 2005, 2007. That's crazy.
How do we get into that list?
It's funny when my favorite fighter Nick Diaz kind of complains about he can't buy a house and stuff, and Dana comes back and says, "Well, I'm not quite sure where you're shopping for a house."
Exactly.
Man, I lived in Sacramento my whole life, and 45 minutes from Stockton. Trust me, he can buy a house.
Yeah.
You could buy a couple of neighborhoods in Stockton for what Nick Diaz is making for a fight.
Look at Faber. He bought a neighborhood with his buddies.
That's crazy. Yeah, exactly. So they can all train together. Isn't that sweet?
Yes.
So end of the day, final answer. Can anybody, keeping all that in mind, can anybody rightfully say the UFC is greedy and they don't look out for the fighters and they're mishandled financially?
Absolutely not.
Absolutely
not.
No, thank you, Uncle Dana. We appreciate it.
Keep putting up those good fights. That's the end of our second segment, pfpsports.com. Make sure you hit us on Facebook, Pound for Pound Sports Show. Make sure you hit like. Coming up next, we're going to talk about Chris Weidman. Is he being ducked? We're going to talk about it. This is Pound for Pound Sports on pfpsports.com. We'll come right back.